The dust of the Texas highway settled on the worn leather of his truck seats as Caleb "Cal" McCormick stared down the long, unforgiving driveway to the Silver Creek Ranch. This was it, the place of his boyhood, the only home his heart had ever known. Now a gilded prison he was being forced to re-enter. His grandfather, Silas McCormick, a man of granite and grit, was gone, and his last will and testament was less a bequest and more a bizarre ultimatum: to inherit the 1,000-acre spread, the cattle, the legacy that was his birthright. Cal had to marry, within 30 days, a woman he had never met, a woman named Laura whose only described quality, circled and underlined in the lawyer's letter as if it were her defining virtue, was that she was of substantial size and generous constitution. The old man, even from the grave, was trying to engineer a dynasty built on what he saw as sturdy, childbearing stock, reducing Cal's future to a transaction, a humiliating merger between a desperate heir and a woman he assumed would be equally desperate to marry into a name and a fortune. With the soul heavier than any saddle he'd ever lifted, Cal made the call. The arrangement was set, and now he was driving toward a wedding day that felt more like a funeral for his own dreams of love and freedom, his jaw set in a permanent clench of resentment against the ghost of the tyrannical old man and the unknown, obese bride who was the key to his cage. 2. The wedding was a quiet, perfunctory affair in the ranch's dusty front parlor, officiated by a bored-looking justice of the peace and witnessed by the stern-faced family lawyer, Mr. Thorne. When Laura arrived, escorted by a severe-looking aunt, she matched the description exactly: a large woman in a simple, tent-like dress, her face mostly hidden by a wide-brimmed hat and a veil of nervousness. She spoke in soft, almost inaudible monosyllables, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, the picture of awkward discomfort. Cal performed his part with a cold, detached efficiency, sliding the ring onto her finger, repeating the vows with all the emotion of a man reading a livestock auction report. He saw a life of quiet, shameful obligations stretching out before him, a marriage of convenience with no convenience and even less marriage. He installed her in the large, separate bedroom at the far end of the ranch house's hallway, a clear physical manifestation of the chasm between them. Their interactions were limited to silent, strained meals where the only sound was the scraping of cutlery on china. He spoke to her only out of necessity, offering curt instructions about the house or the weekly grocery delivery, his words laced with the bitterness he made no effort to conceal. She, in turn, seemed to shrink further into herself, a silent, mountainous ghost haunting the edges of his inherited kingdom. 3. For weeks, this was the rhythm of their non-existent marriage. Cal threw himself into the brutal, dawn to dusk work of the ranch, trying to sweat out his frustration through the hard labor of mending fences, riding the pastures, and tending the herd. The ranch hands, loyal to Silas's memory and wary of the new arrangement, followed his lead with a respectful but distant air. Laura remained a mystery, a closed door at the end of the hall. He'd sometimes catch glimpses of her in the garden, tending to the wildflowers with a surprising tenderness, or sitting by a window with a book, but he never inquired. His assumption was a simple, cruel one. She had gotten what she wanted: a security, a roof over her head, the McCormick Namia, and he was stuck with the burden of her presence. The resentment festered, fed by his pride and his grandfather's manipulative ghost. He began eating alone in his study, avoiding the shared dining table altogether, building walls higher than any on the property. The ranch was his, but it felt emptier and more lonely than it ever had before. A hollow victory paid for with his freedom and presided over by a silent, unwanted wife he was contractually obligated to house but felt no need to know. 4. The first crack in the fatal Section 8 appeared on a rain-lashed night when a section of the stable roof, long neglected, threatened to collapse under the torrential downpour. Cal, roused from a fitful sleep, rallied the hands in a frantic effort to move the terrified horses to safety. Soaked to the bone and shouting orders above the howling wind, he was suddenly aware of another figure working alongside Laura. She wasn't just standing there, she was in the thick of it, her earlier timidity completely gone. She moved with a calm, startling authority, her voice, though not loud, clear and steady as she soothed the panicked stallion he himself had been wary of approaching. She didn't flinch from the mud or the driving rain, expertly helping to secure tarps and lead the animals to dry shelter. In the chaotic flashes of lightning, Cal saw a different person entirely, and not a shy, awkward woman, but someone capable, focused, and utterly fearless. Once the crisis had passed and the hands had dispersed, soaked and grateful, he found himself staring at her, rainwater streaming down her face, her simple night dress plastered to her generous form, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of something other than resentment, pure, unadulterated curiosity. 5. That single event was the pebble that started the avalanche. The next morning, the awkward silence at breakfast was different. It was no longer just hostile, it was charged with unasked questions. Cal, feeling a strange sense of obligation, gruffly thanked her for her help. She merely nodded, but her eyes, a warm shade of hazel he'd never truly noticed before, met his for a fleeting second. Slowly, cautiously, he began to engage her in conversation. He learned she was well-read, surprisingly witty when she let her guard down, and possessed of a keen, analytical mind. His condescending assumption that she was a simple woman content with her lot began to evaporate. One afternoon, he found her in his grandfather's old study, not dusting, but intently studying a complex map of the ranch's water tables and grazing rotations. When he questioned her, she pointed out a flaw in the current rotation that was causing soil erosion in the South Pasture, something his own foreman had missed. The pieces weren't fitting together. The woman he was discovering, intelligent, brave, perceptive, was completely at odds with the timid, simple portrait he and his grandfather had painted. 6. The truth revealed itself not in a grand confession, but in a quiet moment of shared exhaustion after a long day. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, and Cal finally voiced the question that had been consuming him. "Who are you, really, Alara?" The story she told was not what he expected. She was, in fact, a highly qualified large animal veterinarian from a wealthy family herself. Her size was genetic, a fact of her life she had long ago made peace with. Her great aunt, her last living relative, was a bitter, status-obsessed woman who had hidden Alara away. Ashamed of her appearance and furious she chose a dirty profession over a society marriage. Silas McCormick, an old friend of her grandfather's, had known the real Alara, the brilliant, capable woman beneath the surface. His will was not a cruel joke or a demand for sturdy stock, it was a desperate, last-ditch attempt to force two lonely, misunderstood people he cared about together, to give his grandson a true partner and to give Alara the freedom and respect her own family denied her. The obese woman was a test of Cal's character, a hurdle to see if he could look beyond the surface, and he had failed spectacularly for months. 7. The weight of his own prejudice crashed down upon Cal with the force of a physical blow. He had been so blinded by his own anger and his grandfather's seemingly archaic demand that he had never once tried to see the woman standing right in front of him. He had mistaken her quiet intelligence for simplicity, her initial nervousness for a lack of depth, and her physical form for a definition of her entire being. He had been the one who was small, not her. The ranch, the inheritance, felt meaningless in the face of his own shame. He apologized, not with grand gestures, but with the raw, painful honesty that cost him his pride. He told her she was free to go, that he would sign over a portion of the ranch's value to her, no questions asked. She deserved a life without the shadow of his resentment, a chance to practice her profession and find someone who could see her brilliance from the very first moment. He expected her to leave, to finally be rid of the man who had treated her with such cold disregard. It was the least he could do, the only way to begin to atone for his own blindness. 8. But Alara did not leave. She looked at him, not with anger, but with a profound and unexpected understanding. She saw his shame, his regret, and the good man finally breaking free from the shackles of his own expectations and pride. She explained that while Silas's method was undoubtedly flawed, his intention was true. He had seen a loneliness in Cal that mirrored her own, a need for a real connection that went beyond the superficial. She had stayed through the coldness not for the money or the security, but because she had, in glimpses, seen the man he could be, the man he was finally becoming. Her secret was never her size, it was her strength, her intelligence, and her immense capacity for patience and forgiveness. Slowly, tentatively, a real relationship began to blossom, not from a clause in a will, but from mutual respect, shared passion for the land, and the hard-won understanding. Cal didn't inherit the ranch because he married an obese woman. He earned a true partnership and a love he never knew he needed because he finally learned to see the remarkable woman his wife had always been, a woman who was, in every sense, his equal and the greatest inheritance his grandfather could have ever bestowed upon him.